I mean, I've watched your videos. I've done a lot of reading about you. I've heard lots about you and Toddington International from our team at Echosec. But can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, David, and what you do? How did you get into this line of work? Let's start there.
Sure. So it's been kind of this weird circuitous route that led me to where I am today. It's actually my first job out of school was actually working in media and television production. With that, I got really interested in the early 1990s in this new thing called the internet. And I was starting to consider that maybe this was going to be a medium that could play an influential role in society. So I started to pursue studying of that. And the next thing I know, I just happened to be in the right place at the right time and wound up getting involved in a startup company, one of the first internet service providers. It was funded by a consortium of Swiss banks. So there was acquisitions done across the country, and then quickly found myself in a position I always felt uncomfortable with it as vice president general manager of this company. So it was a real sort of, I call it my guerrilla MBA. It was a real rocket sled ride to getting into the high-tech industry. Now, along with that, one of my other passions in life was doing policing. My father was a police officer all his life. It's something that I had always been around. And I volunteered in my community as an auxiliary constable with the Royal Canadian Mounted Police and took a great deal of satisfaction in doing police work some evenings and on a lot of weekends as well. So there was this kind of duality of working in information and communications technology and also doing police work, two things that I really, really enjoyed doing. I guess the long story short is it was just about 23 years ago, just before the dot-com bubble burst, and I got out of the internet service provider business and started working in policing. So I was appointed a supernumerary constable under the RCMP Act. I worked in various sections within the RCMP, including National Security Investigations Section, as it was known at the time, Proceeds of Crime, and a number of others. And as I was doing all of this, now keep in mind, this is still early days of the internet. We're talking sort of middle 1990s at this point in time. So it's internet, relay chat, and Usenet news groups. Started recognizing this need for training, which is a deep passion of mine. When we started thinking about training, one of the things that I was really passionate about is taking this right to the front line. And to this day, that is our target market, our target audience is dealing with the people that are the sharp end, so to speak, actually dealing with day in and day out law enforcement activities. We deal with a lot more than law enforcement now, but that's where it really all started. And yeah, it's just something that has grown from that point. So we started teaching at places like the Canadian Police College, for the RCMP at the Pacific Region Training Center within E Division here in British Columbia. And now these days we work all over the world. So we do work in Australia with police agencies, military agencies there in Southeast Asia, Singapore, for example, the United Kingdom, Europe, Africa, South Asia as well. And then private sector, so banking industry, those that are interested in supply chain management and brand protection. So anti-counterfeiting operations. We've managed to adapt what we do in terms of research, critical thinking, which is really important, and again, another thing I'm deeply passionate about, and incorporating that into all of this. And one of the cool things, I always say that the more I learn, the more I realize I don't know. So when we are doing these training programs, you know, I find I learn as much from the people that I'm working with as hopefully they may learn from me in terms of best practices, methodologies, what's not working, and ways of improving. So we're constantly in a process of doing the best we can to innovate, to really think about what it is that we're doing and to bring new approaches, new methodologies, and new ways of thinking into what could be very linear processes.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. Yeah, and that's something that we can get into a little bit later, but I wanted to ask about the assets of having differentiating beliefs and attitudes within an investigative team. And when you're teaching, it sounds like you're learning because you're constantly surrounded by people that have different backgrounds and come from different areas of expertise and understandings.
Yeah, it's very important. I mean, I think critical thinking is essential. We have various tools available that can be extremely useful, but used incorrectly, they can actually hinder what it is that we are trying to do. Various tools that are good for, as I say, doing the heavy lifting, but the old computer adage, garbage in, garbage out, really does apply. And technology changes all the time. If we just teach a very linear path along how to do something, we're really doing our clients a disservice, because the technology is going to change, maybe even within days. When you look at something like Google, there is between 2 changes per day on Google alone up to into the double digits. So again, we've got to be very careful about entrenching people in a certain way of doing things. I guess key to our philosophy is the old saying, give a person a fish, they'll eat for a day. Teach a person to fish, they'll eat for a lifetime. So we very much want to teach people to fish, so it is to speak, in cyberspace, that they've got the skills to think around technological change as it occurs, and to really think about what they are doing, which is sometimes a challenge, because thinking is hard work, which is why a lot of people don't necessarily do it. To speak to your point as well about working within a group, there's advantages and disadvantages to that. And it depends on the kind of person you are. And it's kind of interesting as we get into critical thinking, it often comes down to mindfulness, thinking about your thinking while you are thinking it. So understanding your own thought process and then applying that to the group you're working in as well. So groupthink is a real thing. Some aspects of groupthink are that when we are in a group of like-minded individuals, our views become more strongly reinforced. We have to be careful about that, because that could actually build on various biases. Biases we have to be mindful of personally and within the group we're working in, because the culture in which we're working could have some very strong biases. And again, it's important to think about that. Also, working within a group, we don't want to be the person, we don't want to be that guy who is always being the irritant. And we often get to that point where, as we are working within a group, we may be a maximizer, we may be a satisficer. That is, we just want harmony, and we're willing to make all kinds of compromises for the purpose of generating that harmony. These are people we have to work with year in and year out. So we may have those moments where we don't say something that we probably should, because we want to maintain harmony within the group. So understanding these group dynamics is actually really, really important if we are to all work effectively, individually and as a group as well.
I am starting to watch, of course, Hunted on Amazon.
Yes.
Right? I'm going to throw that out there. How is that group dynamic working with? And how much of that was scripted versus how much of that is real life? And how did all that work out?
Hunted, really Hunted for me, and this is where we sort of talk about that weird career arc that strangely I started out in television and then wound up getting this phone call out of the blue asking if I wanted to be on that program. It was a fascinating experience. And one of the things that I often suggest is that what our mission is to do is to create an entertaining television program that's going to engage people. It takes place over a 28-day period. It's 12-hour days. You are lucky to get a 20-minute break in that 12-hour day. It is more intense than any operational environment I've ever worked in. And I've worked in some pretty intense operational environments. Think about the pressures that we're exposed to. You're mic'd up for the entire 12 hours you are in the studio. Your every word is being recorded. And anytime you say anything remotely intelligent, a camera swings into your face and you've got potentially 4 or 5 million viewers on the other side of that camera. You start questioning yourself an awful lot. It's a television show, but one of the things I found interesting about it, being on the inside, and you'll never really get a sense of the complexity of the inner workings when it's edited down for television, is the way I looked at it, it was a multi-million-pound simulation being run on an annual basis. I almost describe it as an epiphany for me. And this started the passion for critical thinking, is that how often are you in a situation where you are pursuing, we'll call them fugitive, that's what we call them on the programs, you're pursuing a fugitive, And over a limited period of time with the pressures I just described on top of intense working hours, what happens in that studio in a day is what typically happens in the real world in about a week. So it is tightly compressed. And how often do you get into a situation where you're pursuing an individual? Maybe you catch them, maybe you don't. But at the end of it all, you actually get to see their life on a daily basis because they've got a camera crew with them, and you can compare it to what you were undergoing during that time period as well. And what I realized very quickly is how wrong we often got it, and yet we were convinced that we were right, which is what we call confirmation bias. How various pressures were affecting us. And it was a very interesting group dynamic because we had people that were former military, we had people that were very technically savvy. I would put them in the white hat hacker category. There was myself, and I had a colleague working on the open source intelligence side of things. We had former spooks working with us as well. So all these different cultures. And yet, up until the fact when the camera started rolling, especially season 1, none of us knew each other. I mean, it was just, we just kind of launched into it, and it just kind of all happened organically. I think it says a lot for the talent, certainly the teams that I worked with. I worked on seasons 1 through 3 and then did 2 of the celebrity editions as well. A remarkably talented group of individuals, in my opinion. As far as the quality of the simulation goes, if we had, to use the English phrase, had it done and dusted within 4 days, that would have satisfied us greatly. Producers aren't going to let that happen. And let's face it, their job is to make, and our job ultimately is to make an entertaining and engaging television program. So if we caught everyone in 4 days, where's your TV show?
Yeah.
So there are things that are very realistic, and there are certainly moments of, speaking personally, intense frustration that I experienced as well, where, you know, they want us to replicate the powers of the state, and to that end, the fugitives, as they go on the run, sign contracts I would never sign. I mean, we can do pretty much anything. We get 6 months worth of bank records, 6 months worth of phone records.
Oh, wow.
We can go and seize their devices. We can do covert entries into their homes. So we put tracking devices on vehicles, all that kind of stuff. And it's remarkable what we found as well. Plus, you know, you're going to be on the run for 28 days. You've got 250 pounds to do it. You're not going to survive that long. You're going to be relying on friends. So they have to get friends to sign these contracts as well. We're not told who these people are. So we've got to figure out the links. We've got to figure out who their associates are, both the obvious and the non-obvious relationships, and start putting all of this together. It is an amazingly intense experience and actually a remarkable simulation. I absolutely learned a ton in doing it. And I guess what I also learned is, you know, we all get entrenched, to speak to Ariel's point a little bit earlier on, we all get entrenched in the way that we do things, you know, and why not? Because if it's not broken, don't fix it. It works.
Yeah.
This really turned everything on its ear for me, in that I realized how we can get entrenched, that we're not challenged enough. And it completely changed the way that I think about what we do. Again, the importance of behavioral science, the importance of understanding critical thinking, of understanding group dynamics, of understanding cognitive biases that we are all subject to as well, and how that impacts us in the work that we do.